And it's, I mean, once you engage that, the possibility of where it's going to end up, you can't control that.
No.
I mean, it's still going to continue. Where's it going to go? It's like, oh, if it crashes in the middle of, like they said that it was heading towards the school or something. If you shoot it down and it crashes into the school, then you've got a bigger mess on your hands.
Yeah, and we're agreed that we know that it wasn't hijacked, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's the plane. If it didn't crash anywhere, it's the notion that it was hijacked. It's
baloney. All right. Yeah. So now we've got something that's up there. Was it remote? Probably, and that's another whole story. But obviously, the stories about the plane's behavior is very interesting as far as it being goosed up. You remember some of the stories about the plane having a problem and straining, but clearing a ridge, and then after clearing the ridge, going down.
Yeah.
That I find very interesting because it's almost like it had to get a little juice to get up over this thing before they dropped it where they wanted to. Before we go any further, and I'm just taking a look here also because what you sent me was very replete, and I don't want to stray very far from that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, I'll tell you what. We're going to get to something that's very, very interesting, but before we do that, and again, like I said, Dominic, I mean, I don't want to be forceful about this, but to me it only makes sense that something took place without a shoot down, with a planned site where it went down. But before we get into this whole thing about also what we've talked about with CNN being on the scene and Brian Cabell innocently saying, well, there's a crash site 8 miles from here,
mm-hmm.
and he's like, how the hell did that happen? And I don't know if I told you this. We might have talked about this, but when Wing TV tracked Cabell down, now that he's not working with CNN, they said to him, that was some story. And Cabell said, I thought I had the story of 9/11. And then men in black suits told me I had no story.
See, yeah. What's interesting is going with the notion that there was a second site. There's been some transcripts that came out that were they were ATC, the air traffic controllers, and between them and the radar. Who was it? It was the manager that did the Air Traffic Control System Command Center East, and some management officers, and they got a transponder turned back on, showing a signal for Flight 93 2 minutes after its crash time, and it was still southeast bound. They had an altitude, because the transponder's on, they get an altitude reading. That's the only way you can get one, and it was reading that it was up 8,200 feet, and it's like 15 miles past the actual crash site. And they put the coordinates into Google, and I think it comes out like right by a little area called Hindman, PA.
All right. Well, given the fact that you can't see the maps that we have, are you saying after the event, something was still being recorded at about 8,200 feet?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They turned on the transponder. ATC got a signal. It was 10:05 a.m. It says, I can actually read you part of the transcript right here.
If you wish.
Yeah, here's the management officials going back and forth with ATC. The management says, at 10:05, okay, United 93, we're now receiving a transponder on. He's at 8,200 feet. And ATC comes back, the transponder's on and he's 8,200. Management confirmed, southeast bound still. ATC says 8,200 feet and now getting a transponder on him. And then we go down to 10:06. Management a minute later comes in and says we've lost contact with United 93. And then we go on about 3 minutes later at 10:10. What we got is a message from management. It goes, the last position of United 93, I'm going to give you some coordinates. And they come back. They say 3951 north, 07846. And then they confirm the location again, and they said that's the last known position of United 93, according to the transponder being tracked on radar, which is a good 15 miles after the crash site. And this would actually take it directly over Indian Lake and directly over New Baltimore.
All right, not to muddy the waters any further, but if you remember, you and I might have talked about this on air or off. There is, if we have stuff dropping and, things being shot into the earth, if you follow that tangent, honestly, Dominic, I mean, that plane could have landed in Susquehanna Airport.
Oh, absolutely.
Which could have handled the 700 series, especially if it is, let's face it, you know, a passengerless flight. It could have taken a large 7 series on their airline, on their airstrip. Now that makes things even worse in a sense. It's like, okay, now what do we really have? But you know what it is? It begs the question, if you can disregard what we think are, without a doubt, fake stories, all the folks that saw things never saw the plane actually hit. They lost sight of the plane and soon after saw an explosion. It's the old story about if you didn't see it hit, you didn't see it hit. And let me ask you one other thing. From all the people you talked to, whether you know, Doug or Bob or you know, Viola, was what they saw impacted, was that what gave us that mushroom cloud plume?
Well, what's fascinating is when you show Val McClatchy's photo, 2 residents of the area out there, I don't know if you know, there was a phone call Jeff Shore called Kelly Levernight.
Jeff did it again.
Yes. And Kelly Levernight was saying that she wasn't Kelly, she was Kelly's daughter, and she went over the story, and she's like, oh, no, Val's photo's fake, and this and that. I talked to plenty of people who drove to the crash site like Bob did and Doug and that John I mentioned earlier, and none of them described a mushroom cloud. Not one of them. They said it was smoke, it was black, it was billowing, and it lasted.
Right, it was asymmetrical fire.
Yeah, they said it lasted for several minutes.
All right. So now what do we have then, though, Dominic? I mean, I don't doubt this.
Well, when you listen, what's great is Val McClatchy, if you go through her account, her story is she was sitting home, she was watching television, she was sitting on her couch, and somebody she knew had a helicopter, and they were going to fly over her house that day, was her story. And because of that, she had her camera ready, like she was waiting for them, and she was going to go outside and take pictures of them when they come flying by. And she said she heard, now if you look at Pittsburgh Tribune Review where they gave her full account, she said she heard the plane roar overhead. And her house is a mile past the crash site. And it said ultimately she heard the engines roar over Indian Lake 3 miles east of where it would crash, which we know is impossible. But then she goes on and she tells a story about how, you know, she grabbed her camera, she ran outside, and her story is she took a picture of the smoke plume, and then she was in shock, and she dropped her camera, and the batteries came out of it, and by the time she got the batteries back into it and picked the camera back up, there was no more smoke. Right. And after talking to Susan McElwain and Rick Cheney and all these other witnesses, Viola Saylor, if Val McClatchy ran out and took a picture when she said she did, Val McClatchy took a picture of the white plane. That's why the FBI took her camera, took her computer, took her memory cards, and probably gave her some kind of BS photograph to go sell for $20.
Could it then be, though, that mushroom plume, which is a signature of ordnance, which we kind of believe was shot into the Shanksville crater? Could we agree on that, or what do you think?
Well, I'm open to anything that isn't a 757.
All right. But I mean, that McClatchy photo shows a mushroom cloud, right?
Correct.
All right. Now, if that was ordnance, that very well was perhaps whatever was shot into the ground. But whatever other people are seeing, and here's the other thing, are we looking at 2 things that were going on, and that is this mushroom cloud, that if it was antiseptic, as ordnance, just dissipated. But what you have just said, and that is what most people would say on the crashes of airliners, it's a smoldering, asymmetrical, it's smoking from everywhere, not this tight little mushroom thing that goes up in the air like an A-bomb.
Yeah.